following podcast is recorded and produced by Emerge, a media creators co-op, in affiliation with the network at bicbp-radio.com.
Welcome to the Double Fist Punch Podcast, the only podcast where we instruct you on the art of self-defense through extremely efficient double fist punch action.
Okay. My back's okay that time.
What do you mean?
I hurt my back during the second take, but I'm okay now.
Yeah, I was trying to go for a more Vulcan take on that one.
That's right. Oh yeah, we definitely the one that was definitely had a little bit more logical approach to it.
All right, so
Speaking of Vulcans going crazy.
Oh yeah, going mad as the back of this box. We are covering the Menagerie, as we said last week. We're skipping the Corbinite maneuver. I definitely knew that and didn't have to be told that.
Well, we're not going to skip it. We're just going to come to it next time.
Skipping it, coming back to it, so that we could cover the two-part episode, the Menagerie, which is also the cage, which I didn't mention in the last take we did. So I guess I'll just go straight through and read this here. The Menagerie, Parts 1 and 2, Stardate 3012.4. Spock hijacks the Enterprise and risks death to help his former captain, Christopher Pike, played by Jeffrey Hunter, who has been paralyzed and disfigured in a horrible accident. Spock sets a course for Talos 4, knowing that any contact with this forbidden planet will automatically bring a death penalty. What could motivate him to do such a thing?
That's a different show.
Kirk, forced to convict his first officer and best friend, wonders if Spock could have gone mad. The only two-part episode, The Menagerie, won science fiction's coveted Hugo Award. Air dates November 17th and 24th of 1966. So, and I might have mentioned that this is also the cage.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned that.
So I mean, obviously most people watching this know this is that they did a first pilot, which was not well received by networks. So no one saw it, and so they were allowed to film a second pilot, which the time was very rare. And they made some changes, which I'm sure we've talked about already. And that episode was The Cage, but Roddenberry was obviously thought he had this great footage and he had this great backstory that he wanted to implement into an episode, which obviously there was a ton, so they worked it into a two-part episode. And to be honest, I think it really works. I think it really kind of gives us a lot of background, and I think it's really cool. Gives us, if you think about the amount of lore that has been created in this episode, as we go through the episode, there's so many things we can talk about, and that's why I really enjoyed. I watched it with my son last night, and he hadn't seen this, so he noticed a lot of things because he's a big Star Trek fan too. So,
yeah, it's definitely a good use of, like, from a production standpoint, it's definitely a good use of material. Like the Menagerie, like the parts they filmed for the clip show, essentially.
Right.
Like, it's a whole episode. Like I'd say, like, if you cut out all of the stuff from the cage, you're probably looking at about a standard episode of Star Trek.
You're probably right. Probably plus or minus a couple of minutes, yeah, for sure. Because there's obviously some things that are not. The cage is about an hour and 2 minutes. I looked it up. The standalone cage episode was about 102 minutes. And I'm assuming that's with credits and everything. And then there's some stuff that's deleted. So if you have, like, Paramount, you can go watch The Cage. It's episode 0, which is what I did last night. Rewatch. After I watched this, I watched The Cage, and I noticed some things. And I've seen this before, but I noticed some scenes some things that got cut out that are kind of explored a little bit more on, in the full episode.
Yeah, So something to note is like they couldn't actually get the actor that
Jeffrey
played
Hunter. Yep.
that played Pike
Yep.
originally. The new one is Jeffrey Hunter. Or
No, Jeffrey Hunter is the original actor, and he was a pretty big actor. Like he's a country actor. He was a Western star, and he died in 1969 in a car accident filming another film somewhere in Italy or Spain, I think. So he, ironically, I guess if he would have gotten the Star Trek job, then he wouldn't have gotten into the car accident. So I don't know when, but he died. He was only 42 when he died. Like, so that's not the reason he wasn't available, though. From my understanding, he just wasn't available because he's like, I'm not going to come in just to not on a show that I'm not going to be on. I think he was, they were lucky to get him because he was a relatively well-known film actor already. And, so they were looking for that kind of style actor, supposedly. So.
Yeah, he's like, I read that as well, that it was like this relatively famous actor at the time. Like they did that a lot for the pilot episodes, like both pilot episodes,
right.
As they get these high profile
Shatner
actors.
was an up and coming actor at the time. He'd done a couple movies that he'd starred in, and I think this once they decided to revamp it, it's funny that you would think that it's kind of weird when you think about it that they decided to redo the pilot, but they changed a bunch of characters, a lot of different actors, and they changed the captain. Like they changed not just the actor, they changed the name of the character. So I don't know, like I haven't read a lot too much about if he chose to do that on purpose or he decided just to change the character, because Pike, Kirk, they're almost the same sounding style, like, the simple name. And I'm wondering if like he decided that in his mind he wanted to keep that original Enterprise cast and like crew in mind, and this is another, because obviously also updated, made some changes to the set. So clearly they must have gotten some production notes from NBC or CBS or whatever it was, that they wanted them to make some other changes too, in terms of like the the little lamps and stuff that were on the furniture, costumes and things like that.
Although I think in the second pilot they still have those same costumes though, right?
They're not. I think they're even I don't know. They're not quite the same. They're similar, but there's definitely some different costuming for sure. With the pants and like even like Dr. Piper has some different things on and stuff like that. So it's neat.
So interestingly, back to the like the present, I guess, since the whole episode is depicted as a flashback.
Right.
The actor they have for Pike now, looks more similar to his Strange New Worlds, or I guess the Strange New Worlds Captain Pike looks more similar, in my opinion, to this actor than he does to the original actor for Pike.
Sure, I can agree with. Yeah, I think I get that. I think this actor, kind of. It's funny because they put the gray hair in him and stuff like that to make him look older, and obviously a ton of makeup, prosthetics, or whatever that they did. And I think that they've, there's all kinds of funny memes about the use of, the guy's hair and stuff like that. Because Anson Mount, I wanted to look it up so I didn't get it wrong. But Anson Mount, who's been on a bunch of different things, like he's taken over the character of Captain Pike. But there's so much, like I definitely see some similarities. But there's different things that he did in his performance that harken back to the little bit of Pike that he was able to watch.
Oh yeah,
from Jeffrey Hunter's performance.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't really have much of a performance.
No, he had much.
Yeah. It was beeping and moving his eyes.
Yeah, moving his eyes around. There's a couple things. There are a couple things. Let's start going through it. Let's start going. Yeah. Let's go. How do you want it? You want to?
Let's just start at the beginning. Let's just start about how horrific that is. Like he's as close to a vegetable as you can get.
So the timeline is for those of you that might be watching Strange New Worlds, everything that's happens in the Menagerie / the cage on Strange New Worlds has already happened a couple of years before this. So everything we're seeing on that show now, and now it's gone through 2 seasons, it has already happened in Captain Pike's past. And also, it's been referenced. Actually, if you watch Star Trek Discovery, there's references to this. So Captain Pike is in an entire season of Star Trek Discovery, and now he's had 2 seasons of. So Anson Mount, has played a lot more of Captain Pike than anybody else has played already. But so that stuff has already happened. So what I think that's really cool is that we're seeing this younger Spock, and this Captain Pike's not his friend. It's his mentor. It's his dad. It's like more of a father than maybe his own father, so to speak. So I think that's established pretty well. Even in I think that leads to why I think I like this so much. But yeah, the thing is, so we know on Strange New Worlds, Pike. I don't want to do any spoilers, but Pike kind of knows. He's had a vision of himself with that look with that stuff on his face all melted from radiation, but he thinks that that's going to lead to his death, which is kind of, that type of thing. So it's kind of neat. It's really kind of neat. And yeah, but it's a horrific thing, but it's an heroic thing. He does it to save cadets.
Yeah. And we also get the impetus for, the way they wrote Spock and Pike's relationship in Strange New Worlds, because Spock is totally out of what Kirk would consider his character, because Spock is deceitful in this episode. He's very much, I think he's the one who arranges for them to go there in the first place.
Yes.
I'm pretty sure. They weren't really summoned there.
Well, as we get through the episode, I want to when we get through the episode, as we finish the discussion, I want to ask you your perception on where Spock got the idea to do this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
I think that's an interesting.
There's some interesting, those aliens, they have powers which kind of give you the idea that this might have been all set up by them.
Yes.
But we'll get to that. So what do you think of Spock attacking Starfleet personnel? He doesn't attack them really, but he
doesn't do it's
them.
kind of funny. Christian, my son Christian and I were watching the episode, and we obviously the Enterprise goes to the starbase, and now we're already kind of into the episode, and everybody's wondering well, we didn't send you a message, so there's already people are concerned that Spock is lying, but Kirk doesn't want to believe it. McCoy doesn't want to believe it. There's a great conversation where McCoy's I can't, Spock can't do it. But Kirk's just so darn confused about it. So Spock basically goes, and he has the computer knowledge to do, obviously. So he's in the computer lab or whatever he's doing, the communications room. And he's one guy says, "Hey man, you're not supposed to be in there." And it's Spock tries to basically not do anything to him until he kind of has to. And then the other guy he just knocks out right away. He knocks the one guy out on this almost immediately with the Vulcan. So he does 2 Vulcan neck pinches. So he doesn't really it's kind of funny thing. The one guy's punch him in the face 5 times, and it just shows that Vulcans are pretty tough. You can hit them in the face pretty good, and they're gonna take a punch. Yeah, he didn't try the double fist punch. If he'd tried the double fist punch, maybe it would work better.
That might have worked.
We'll never know.
Yeah, well, obviously he wasn't trained in the superior martial arts, being just.
Well, he's a computer guy.
Yeah, just a computer tech. They don't teach the good moves to just everybody,
You're in the lab. You don't need to do that stuff. No, I think that's definitely he's doing things that if you're just, you said it before we went on the air, if you're just watching this, what the frick is wrong with Spock? It's so, Yeah,
they don't, I think they call it burying the lead, or maybe they do bury the lead. I might be using the terminology incorrectly. Julien, help me out.
Have you heard that term?
Burying the lead when, we already know what's happening.
Right.
Well, either way, they say we come into this episode and we know nothing. It's not like a lot of the other episodes where it's this guy just died. What happened to? Oh, there's the bad guy. Right. It's not like that.
Right. No, this one definitely you have to watch this episode to find out what's going to happen. There's very little that's there's not a captain's log that unbeknownst to us at this time that this had already happened. Like sometimes they kind of give it away because that was the way things were done sometimes in the 60s. But they don't do that at all in this episode. It's very secretive in terms of what's going to happen. So
yeah, they definitely let us like kind of discover what's going on. Like if you are watching this episode for this first time,
right,
it's just going to be like, what is happening right now? Why is he doing this?
Well, like, and the thing is, he goes in there, and early on he goes in when he stays alone with, like, right away, you're like, he's there with Captain Pike, and he says, like, you know what I'm going to do, right? We have to do this. And he's like, and beep, beep, he's like, it's your life. Like, we have to do this. Like, Spock has made a logical decision, which we realize later on that he's made the logical decision that everything that Captain Pike has done for him is more important than his own life and his own career.
Yeah.
Which is Spock's made a logical decision. He's not being manipulated by like a something or a disease. He's making this decision because this guy's that important to him.
Yeah, even Pike didn't want him to do this.
No,
because
Pike knows that because of General Order 7 or whatever it is, that theoretically, he's going to be executed. It's the only executable offense left on the books. Yeah. It's a little overplayed.
Yeah, a little overplayed. Maybe just definite career ender. Yeah. Like maybe don't execute.
They clearly understand like they don't want anyone to go to this planet. And I'm assuming that, so let's talk about General Order 7 or whatever it is. Like Starfleet knows what it is because Pike is the one who came back and said, listen, we're going to be going to this planet with these people with heads with big butts on the back of their heads. And they look like butts, by the way. Let's just be clear. They look like butts. There's like a butt crease, like butt cheeks in there. But they can control your minds and they can do stuff. So we should really avoid that planet because if we go there, we'll probably get that ability and we'll kill ourselves. Like they kind of allude to that in the episode, which is why, like, I think that's why General Order 7. But the only reason General Order 7 exists is because Pike went back to Starfleet and said we should not have this. We shouldn't be allowed to go to that planet. We should close off that section of space.
Yeah, I feel like other things would also elicit like a General Order 7 like response. Like
right.
I know there's I think it was in TNG we encounter a hostile race that like they almost destroy the Enterprise, but.
Right.
Picard convinces them, oh, no, we'll never be back here.
Right.
But, it's...
Well, maybe there are General Orders, we just don't hear about them. Maybe we just don't hear about them. But it seems like it's just weird that we would have General Order 7 for this one specific planet. But it works for the episode, obviously.
The one executable offense.
Yep, that's it.
So we get those stakes, and he kidnaps Pike, and it's a kidnapping.
Yep.
Like Pike didn't want to go.
Yep.
He didn't want to do this. He didn't want to be part of the end of Spock's life, essentially.
Yeah, he couldn't put any brakes on the wheelchair. So.
And we also see like a can he move his wheelchair like independently?
They say Commodore Mendez says that he can move it forward a little bit, back a little bit. Maybe turn it, but that's about it. Everything else he's pretty much just required. He can't like. And again, I think they make a good point of that there's all these medical advances, but his body, because of his injuries, there's just no way to tap into his human brain, and it's kind of disappointing that we're this far into the future, they still can't fix this stuff, but. Obviously, it works for the episode. I mean, it's just one of those things you have to yada yada.
Yeah, I think the idea of the episode was that like his life is so horrific that, or what's left of his life is so horrific. His existence is so tragic that anything is preferable, essentially.
Right. Well, I mean, so obviously. Kirk follows in a shuttlecraft with Commodore Mendez.
Yes, Commodore Mendez.
And like they get to that point where they can't turn back, so they're going to run out of fuel and they're going to suffocate and everything. And I like the fact that Spock just says, I can't let them die because that's bad. So he's not that insane if you think he's crazy. And then he says, okay, Dr. McCoy, I didn't have orders to do this, so arrest me.
Yeah, that was the whole point of like, obviously we learned later that letting him die would have been kind of antithetical to what he was actually trying to do because like the whole reason he didn't tell Kirk about this is because Kirk, as he says, would have been 100% on board with it. and Kirk didn't want to, or Spock didn't want to, lead Kirk to his
He didn't want
death,
anybody else to
essentially.
have to suffer for what he decided he needs to do. So that's kind of cool. And then he has this whole ploy to that it's funny because they'll get to it and they described in the episode that Spock has this plan. I'll do the court-martial thing because that will make them waste time. I demand an immediate court-martial. So Spock immediately says, I want a court-martial hearing right now. I waive everything. Not when we get back to Starbase with whatever. I want you to do it right now. So he, again, even if you think he's crazy, he's still outsmarting them all the way. He has contingency B all set up in case he couldn't get there.
Mm-hmm.
His hope, obviously, that he was going to get there, but then obviously if they don't get there, then he has to this whole other plan he had all along.
Yeah, that was like I think that was a rhetorical trick he used on the Commodore, which is interesting that maybe the Commodore was playing along all along, but the Commodore asks him why,
Right.
which opened up the court to basically hearing evidence,
Right.
Basically without any restrictions.
Right.
Which in this case, the evidence happened to be the cage.
Well, and obviously, as you know, as you learn in the episode, it's not really Commodore Mendez. Anyways, it's always just someone that was in their mind anyway. But they clearly are able to read minds from long distances, and they're able to almost in some sense, you feel like they've communicated with Spock, that they've talked about this like in some telepathic way, so that he understands what they want to do. And again, I think but Spock doesn't realize that Menendez is fake.
No.
He clearly thinks that that's the real Menendez. Because for whatever reason, I think they kind of feel like that's the best way for this to play out. The Telosians. We never mentioned their name, the Telosians.
Yeah.
So
technically, Spock did not have means for a court-martial because he did not actually have 3 command officers on the ship.
Right.
He only had 2.
But Pike was never taken off the active duty roster, and Spock knew that.
Well, I meant the Commodore.
Oh, true.
Yeah, he had Kirk.
True.
Pike.
So maybe that's another reason they didn't want Spock to realize that, because Spock would be like, well, we can't have a thing because it's fake. Like, so I don't know. I guess you could read into it that way. You're right, because technically Commodore Mendez wasn't there. I always kind of forget that. Like, he's not really there. Like, he's not there. But he's what you would expect him to be.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, he's kind of behaving the way you think he'd behave. Like, and following the rules. And, like, that's why I love the end of that first episode. I jumped a little bit. Is that when, like, he kind of lays into Kirk. He's like, you've just lost your command now, too. Like, and then I love that line. I was like, lock him up. When Kirk, he's pissed at him, like, lock him up. Because what else is he going to do? But, so they, like you mentioned, they open the door. And then we start seeing this stuff. My son immediately says, before we even get back to the dialogue, he's like, well, what are these camera shots? Like, he's like, why would they be, and then they immediately, and I give them a lot of credit for this in the writing of this episode, say that no, there are no ships, even in the future, that keep this kind of detailed records, that this is clearly, but this is literally what happened. This is all video or whatever, imagery that they're seeing on the screen, which is actual footage, like, that is accurate to what happened. And Pike even says, beep, yes, this is true. This is exactly how it happened.
Yeah, I think,
which is obviously a yada yada because we're watching filmed footage.
Yeah, also, I think they might have, like, remastered the stuff from the cage that they're seeing on the screen, which is really interesting.
Well, I like when they're in the briefing room and they're literally watching it like a movie.
Yeah.
Like, there's literally rear projection. And it's at the far end of the briefing room. There's like a screen on the wall. Like, you might as well have a guy with like a movie projector. Obviously, it's rear projection. And then after they'll zoom in on the screen, and then they cut over to the actual footage. So even like the technique for its time, I think, is done pretty well. I do like that first shot of the Enterprise, where it's like the ship's kind of pulling and they do the thing and they kind of come up onto the top of the hull. And that the bridge is like they kind of fade through the hole into the bridge.
It's got like a glass dome almost,
like
so that's the
dome.
idea.
Yeah.
I honestly thought there might have been a glass dome. Like I didn't catch like phasing. Obviously, you see like I don't think they at least for me got the exactly what they wanted to portray, because I didn't see that as phasing through the wall. I saw that as they're just in a like almost half the bridge is a glass dome,
Right.
which obviously there are cuts to the screen
Right.
in the episode, so like it's not, but like
I always felt like the Enterprise has the bridge of the Enterprise has a glass ceiling. That if you were sitting on the bridge of the Enterprise, and also the Next Generation Enterprise too, because you can see that it gets broken. Like you could literally look up and see space through the ceiling, which seems really dumb, like a really bad idea.
See, but that was kind of my assumption too, was that it was a glass dome. If you watch the original,
or transparent aluminum, which was invented by Mr. Scott back in 1984.
if you watch the original, not what is it called, like the not remastered version of it, it's literally just the Enterprise and then a circular cutout, and they just zoom in on it. It's so janky, and you're like, what the hell am I watching?
I didn't really have any other way of doing it back then, but I mean, I do like even on the back of the there's this one matte painting that they use.
Here,
this is this one's a very well-known matte painting, and then there's another one at the very beginning of the episode when they beam down and they only use that technique a couple times, where they would do a big giant matte painting, and then there would be like like they would have one little tiny thing and they would just chroma key it in or whatever, however they did it back then. But I always liked, because this is obviously from the episode when they make him relive some memories. So what do you want to get to? Do you want to get to anything else like we want to talk about within what's going on in the real Enterprise, or do you want to get into some of what's going on with the flashbacks?
I just wanted to mention, like, I think it's just cool that like everything they were seeing on the screen, like they weren't like I think Uhura mentions, if I remember correctly, that they weren't receiving any transmissions.
Right.
Like that's just the Telosians projecting that onto the screen.
Yes.
Theoretically, the Telosians could just put them there and make them see it in,
Well, I think they're trying to get them to understand why they want Captain Pike to come back. They want them to have context of the end. I've always viewed it is that they wanted to give Kirk context for why, because they're hoping once they get there, Kirk will have seen the whole story play out, and Pike will admit that he should just stay there, and that they can then justify. But the thing that's funny about it too, and they talk about at the end, is those images weren't just sent to the Enterprise. Those images were sent to Starfleet too. So they were seeing those images. Commodore Menendez and the dark-haired woman that makes a funny comment about being friends with one of Kirk's girlfriends. They're seeing that footage back at Starbase 4 or 5 or whatever it was. So it's interesting that they're all seeing this, and it's weird too, because like in a sense, like why did they have to put it on a screen? Couldn't they just project it into their minds? But I think again they were trying to. They all understand it's all about the illusion. Their whole thing is the illusion of so in a sense, the illusion of a fake court-martial is kind of what these people like. They're all about fantasy. Everything they do in their lives is based on this addiction to playing out fantasies based on memories.
That's why it really, really leads me to believe that Spock had to have talked to them.
Yeah.
Like, he had to have, I mean, maybe they didn't give him all the details with, Commodore Mendez and all that sort of stuff, but like, he had to have talked to them and planned taking him there, because it just...
Well, we might as well talk about it. I agree with that. I feel like they reached out to him somehow knowing that what had happened to him. And as we get to the end of the episode, they really needed Pike. So for to be able for their race to survive, they needed people, so to speak, and a lot of the races that they've tried to work with don't work. So they really felt like they were so somehow they are connected to Pike still. And when they find out about the accident, because it's not like the accident was like 10 years ago. The accident was relatively recently. Because again, if we haven't mentioned this, this episode takes place 13 years. What we're seeing happened 13 years ago. So, there's when we watched Star Trek Next Strange New Worlds, that's 10 years before. So obviously that's where I got my numbers that whatever happened with this episode and when we see Strange New Worlds is about 3 years later. So clearly they have been monitoring they're able to see, whatever Pike from across the galaxy, maybe because of the terrific energy accident, that maybe they're connected to him after having probed his thoughts so much. And they find him initially too. Like if you think about it,
he's there on the planet.
Yeah, like,
and he sees the same.
Yeah,
his logic doesn't make him immune from seeing the illusions that they put forward.
Well, because Kirk doesn't know what's happened to Pike, but clearly Spock knows. So it wasn't like he got an email. So do you think that the Telosians reached out and said, hey, you're still on that ship. You were his friend. We have we want him to come here. That he can live out a relatively normal life instead of being stuck in this chair. And he can be with someone he clearly was in love with.
I think all of the signs point to him being contacted by the Telosians just because of how he doesn't really seem, well, other than Commodore Menendez disappearing, he didn't really seem shocked by any of the things that, like he even says, well, turn on the view screen or something like that. And then it turns on, and it's there. So he knew that was going to happen.
Right.
So the only logical explanation for that is that he knew that, or they contacted him.
Well, clearly they've probed Spock's mind, so they know what Spock's doing. So even if Spock didn't have to say, well, let's have a meeting, we'll do a Zoom call, and here's my plan about how we'll do like a fake court-martial. In case if I can't get him there, then we're going to have to do a fake court-martial. They've obviously probed his mind, and they know what the plan is, that they trust him, that he's going to do what he has to do to get him there, and then we kind of get into that, what do you think of like what we see of that era of like Pike and Spock and number one, and what do you and if you'll notice in front of us, we have some martinis, because I really do like that scene. So cheers. Because who'd want a dry martini? I'm not a bartender.
No, you're not.
I really like that doctor though.
Oh yeah, he's just the old.
I like that scene a lot. I love the music in that scene.
Yeah, you're sure giving me a lot of medical advice, bartender, or something like that.
Well, he's going in there. He's like, I'd like the doctors to agree with my thing that we're gonna. Oh, of course, I agree. Like, so you can see that they have a friendship already. And he's like, what the devil are you putting there, ice? He's like, well, who'd want a dry martini? So like clearly, but I love that scene. So much. I love that scene that he's confiding in his friend, he's confiding in his doctor, that he's fed up. Like he got people killed, and it's very Kirky too. Like it's kind of like Kirk being, just fed up. But we never see Kirk kind of in that mindset. But we definitely, Pike's a different character. He's a different type of captain, even though they're both very strong and all that stuff. But he just went through something horrific, and he feels like maybe he should do something else. More like Sisko on Deep Space Nine, in a sense, that he's ready to try a different career. Maybe the Federation isn't the only thing out there for him, and he says, do what? Are you gonna be an Orion slave trader? What are you gonna do?
That does make a lot of sense, actually. That Pike feels a lot like, as depicted in that episode, anyway. he feels a lot like Sisko will feel like.
Or even in Next Generation,
Yeah.
that first episode after the Borg, episode 2 of the Borg season, when Picard goes back to his hometown. He goes back to see his brother.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that episode. I think that, there's like PTSD there. There's like clearly they're not afraid to cover that. And
wait till we get to that.
I love that episode. To take a slight tangent, when he has that fight in the winery with his brother, and he literally just starts to cry, and it's not like a Star Trek fight. It's just two guys. It's two brothers like fighting each other, like they were kids, and he's just like, you don't know what they did to me. And I remember watching that episode the first time when you're just shocked, and you realize how lucky you already have Patrick Stewart as playing Captain Picard. But I think this is a similar kind of scene, like that they're humans and they have their frailties and stuff. And I think that's a great scene. And the music, that's the original Alexander Courage music, and it's just really good. It's just good music.
Yeah, we definitely see like Pike's more serious than Kirk, I think. Like just a little bit, like in the way in his mannerisms, he holds himself a little bit like more rigidly. I want to say
definitely.
I'd say that Kirk has a lot of swagger.
Definitely, like there's a little bit more conceit with, and you'll find when they get into Strange New Worlds, you'll see that, and I don't want to give too much away, but you're going to see that different will play out on Strange New Worlds. The other thing is funny, like he mentions what happens on Rigel 7 or whatever it is, that he loses his ensign and stuff. That's an Easter egg. It's not, because all these years later, that concept of what happens on Rigel 7 is talked about on Strange New Worlds too. So there's just so many smart things that they're doing in Strange New Worlds, which makes everything on this. There's so much stuff. Number one, like the way she's kind of Spocky, like just these different characters and how they're going to take like that little bit we learned about these little bit of characters and apply it to a show that we're going to put out 30 something years later. 50, what is it? More than that. It's whatever it is. It's 50 years later.
Number one is tough.
Yeah.
She's a tough woman. Like
she's running that briefing.
Yeah, she's very no nonsense. I appreciate her as a character. I wish Kirk had a character. Well, maybe I don't, but like, because like it's easy to just say, well, I wish Kirk had this or that, but like it would have been interesting if Kirk had like Spock kind of filled the same role that like number one takes on, but it's also different because like she's just I don't know how to describe it. There's just a lot of like intensity there.
She's got that tough thing. She's very rules and regulated. She's very by the book, and I think that kind of like lines right up. Like the fact that we don't even know her name and he just calls her number one. Like we don't learn her name in canon for a very, very long time. And I think that she's played very well. I like that she's like the helmsman and like the science officer. I don't know. I just think it's really, I like the other guys, like I like the crew that kind of beams down with them. And I really love, for whatever reason, I love the music in this episode. When they take her, because it's really funny. They beam down we're on to the Telosians, and they end up having to go to the planet and everything. And like they come up on these old guys, and it's funny because there's a trick here too, because Christian caught this right away because he was like, they say this is Vina, and her parents are dead, and she was born right after we crashed. So my son's like, wait a second. So she's like 17. she's a minor, but she's not a minor because we find out that she was an adult member of the crew of the ship that crashed. But at that moment, she's supposed to be like 17 or 18 years old, and she's like flirting with the captain. But clearly you see that he's attracted to her right away. Like he's something about him that he's attracted to her.
Yeah, it might not even be entirely voluntary on his part. It might be the Telosians doing something.
Definitely.
Which we see more primitive emotions seem to block out their
that he figures that out. It is very Captain Kirky. Actually, any captain from Star Trek that's kind of figuring out like how to mess with the aliens so much. I mean, that's a theme through all these shows. how to get under their skin, how to kind of, like again, there's any way out of the cage, I'll find it. You could almost put Captain Kirk and Sisko in that maybe Janeway too. You could put them all in that cage, and they'd probably all find a way to fight out of that cage. Where Picard would be like, "Well, let's discuss it, and let's access some literature that we could read and discuss, like things like that." Where Picard's a very different type of person in these environments. I think that that's really well laid out, and I like that they take them and the crew realizes it, and I love that scene when they get their cool. I love those original phasers. They're even not even called phasers. They're just lasers. They look like just a piece of there's a little handle on. They're pieces of shit. But I love those original phasers. They're not even they're just called lasers. They don't even have the word phaser yet. And they start blasting and the shit but the doctor right away in the briefing is like, maybe we did. Like, we just don't. Their ability to mind control is, we have to be very careful about this. Like, we have to be very careful because they can outthink us with this stuff, which is neat.
I think we see that same prop laser as well. Like, I think they have that in. No, I can't remember the name of the episode. The one with the robots, the androids. Yeah. I think.
That phaser is what those guys have when they're on that planet, which makes sense because they would have an older model too.
Yeah, and then the doctor in the first aired episode with the salt monster.
Oh yeah,
he
that's
also
right.
Has one of those.
Yeah, Doctor, what's his face? Leonard, no, whatever the guy's name is. He's got one of those. The salt monster guy. Yeah.
So at least they didn't go away entirely.
No, it's a cool prop. Yeah, I saw one online once. It was sold for like $15,000 or something. Like one of the original ones. Now you can just make all that stuff out yourself, laser printer. But
speaking of the phasers, by the way, I like that. So the ship that multiple episodes they reference phaser crews as if it's like a gunnery position.
Right.
Essentially.
Yeah, definitely.
They bring down one of the ship's phasers. And I guess that's just what's in the ship firing phasers is those guns.
Oh, I didn't think of it that way.
Like I interpreted it as they literally just took one of the guns from the ship, put it on the planet, and then just fired it at the side of a mountain. I
didn't think of it that way because I felt like somehow there was an energy transfer from the ship though.
Yeah,
there's almost like a Bluetooth technology that would allow them to transfer the ship's energy to that device. And I never thought of it that they literally just took one of the phaser banks out of the ship and on a cargo transporter and beamed it down and set it up and sheared off the whole mountain. Like basically, because even later on you'll see that they oh wow, we did fuck this up pretty well. Like, we just couldn't see, that is neat. And they got the fake little goggles, and we see the action and stuff. Like, I think the action's pretty cool. I like it. I like the camaraderie of the crew. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it's a good thing they didn't aim that thing at the ground. It would have just blown up the whole facility.
Well, it's funny because later on, when they start, when he starts to realize it's all mind control based, like when the other crew beams down, that's kind of neat. So.
He grabs one of the phasers and he fires it and nothing happens, but there's still a hole there.
There's a hole, and then he holds it up to the guy's head, and he's like, I'm testing my, I think you're mind controlling me, and you're preventing me from seeing that hole in the glass. I think I'm going to try that out in your head, because if I fire this at your head, you're dead. Like, your head's gone, so there won't be any illusions left because you won't have a head to create those illusions. With like the goofy little ways they made the little whatever the veins pop. That's pretty good pretty good prosthetics for
creepy as hell.
Pretty good prosthetics for 1965 or whatever this was.
Even with the modern scanning technology, when they rescanned the footage, I couldn't really see the seams.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's.
I like
really well done in this.
There's some. I mean, the goofy Viking-looking guy that he fights is hilarious.
Yeah,
it's so bad.
Oh yeah,
it's such a bad. It's a bad fight. It's the one thing that Christian and I talked about last night, and you even talked about this downstairs when we were watching you build your Legos, was that Captain Kirk's a great fighter.
Mm.
Jeffrey Hunter is not a great combat. He was not a good stage combat fighter. Like that fight, he doesn't look believable as the captain of a ship when he's fighting the guy with the bad teeth.
Yeah, he just ends up like on his hands and knees, and he's just trying to get up, and like the throw was interesting. It does. I think when he throws the sword at him, he like throws it like
he kind of throws it like that,
Yeah.
and then they cut right to it's already in his back. And he's got a weightlifting belt on, which is like that huge thing. And I think I Googled this before, and I probably got it wrong. I'm pretty sure it's the same actor that played Bigfoot on The $6 Million Man about 10 years later. That's all that guy ever did. He was always just a really cool guy. And like, you know, I recognized he played Bigfoot, I think, on $6 Million Man. But he like, and it's like that, you know, that set that they had somewhere that was from some other movie that they used.
Definitely.
And, you know, and it's funny, like, but I like the scenarios that they put him in. They want him to like become connected to her by putting him into one of his memories, and but she's there too. So he realizes that he has to. It's kind of like a holodeck without the safeguards. You kind of got to play it out. Like if you die in this thing, you may really die. Like, or you're going to at least experience the level of pain. Because they do mess with him when they put him in like the lava and shit, and his arms are on fire and everything. Like that's pretty well done, I think.
Yeah, they boil him or something.
Whatever,
like
yeah,
that.
like whatever it is. So, like from a fable from when you were a child. I don't know what fable he was told, but that's pretty bad. How do you like it when he goes back to Mojave?
Oh, the Orion slave girl.
No, Mojave. Before he goes to the Orion slave girl, he goes to Mojave. His farm is Mojave.
Oh yeah.
So here's how I know this. So it's not in that episode, but in the original Cage episode, clearly they're just sitting on a soundstage and there's a matte painting behind them. And he said, I grew up in Mojave. And then Vina, who's supposed to be like his country bumpkin wife at that point in The Illusion, is talking about that this used to be all desert, but now it's all farmland and stuff. So even though we make it feel like it's like Texas or Georgia or something, like in the future, this future of Earth, the Mojave Desert is now all green. So they've terraformed Earth. So all the deserts are now, and he grew up there, and he's got his horse Tango, and I like that element of it. That like. Because I always joke about like all these sci-fi things, like Elon Musk talking about he wants to terraform Mars and everything. I'm like, you know what? We've got all these problems on Earth. Well, if we have the terraforming technology to do Mars, why don't we just do Earth? We're already here.
Like, terraforming a natural desert on Earth would have some unforeseen consequences.
I guess, I suppose. But I mean, I find the fact that in the future that they've found ways of making the Earth more livable because of population or because they had to or whatever. But I do like that scene where he's back with her and like, because he mentions wanting to go back to his farm, and seeing his horses when he's with the doctor. And that scene is longer in the original Cage cut. Where he talks about it, and then she says some things, and she says something about I made sandwiches that were your mother's recipe and stuff like that. So in that alternate universe, he's been there. He's supposed to believe like the illusion is that they're married and that they're living there. It's not just a visit. Like that's something. And then they take him to they do the Orion slave trade thing. Mm-hmm. But even that is a ton amount of canon that's been created because we get the green slave girl, which is obviously Vina again. Mm-hmm. But it's like the Orion slave girl thing is a huge thing in Star Trek when they talk about Orion slave traders. And, that other guy that's kind of like the corrupt captain who's sitting there, like the weird Starfleet guy that's like, hey, Captain Pike, nice place you got here.
Yeah, that whole scene was like a little strange.
Yeah.
And then we cut to somebody like, I think they're back on the ship or
right.
something, and they're like, he's losing his will to fight this. Like,
he's tired, they said.
Yeah. I don't remember how they're watching. Their sensors, I think, was how they were watching this.
I think so. Yeah.
Or maybe the televisions were projecting it. I don't know.
Maybe they got tired.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because then like they I like the Telosians. Like, he's figuring out the Telosians, but they're figuring out him too, because like he's like, like, I'm angry and you couldn't. He's starting to figure out like that, when you weren't paying attention and I ran at the glass and I startled you. So he starts to put together that there are certain emotions they can't read through. But they also decide that he feels bad that they punished her instead of him when he was the thing. So like, oh, now you want to protect her. Very interesting. So maybe you are like, maybe, you're falling for her, which is what they really is their ultimate goal. Because they've clearly scanned ships before looking for the person that, because Venus says it, like, like, they searched my mind in what I thought would be the ideal man that I would be in love with, and it's you, and I just can't help be in love with you. Like, it's pretty like cool, like, because otherwise it's stupid that they fall in love in like 12 minutes.
So during that scene where the Telosian is mentioning that, she observing that he's starting to feel protective.
Right.
It says something that I caught, and I'm wondering. I'm almost certain it was deliberate. That it says wrong think. So, for context, like that's a big well, not a huge thing, but it's a thing in George Orwell's 1984.
Oh, I didn't catch that.
Yeah, which was written in 1940 something.
I didn't catch that.
Yeah, she says wrong thing. So I am almost certain that that's a reference to 1984.
Oh, okay.
I just thought it was an interesting little.
There is a little bit of that too, where there's definitely some conversations at some point in the episode with the Telosians about that. They had an advanced society and they destroyed themselves, and that they all went underground. And then when they went underground, they basically developed this like ability to amuse themselves, and to the point where they all became addicted to it. And basically that their race is dying. But there is this thing about, again, that this theme that Roddenberry has in Star Trek about society destroying itself. That, and that's one of the reasons they don't want more humans to come there, because the humans will learn this power and they'll end up taking it back and destroying their own society as well, because we did it here. So they're not this impotent race like some of the other races that we meet in Star Trek, like the Q, or some of these other races that are infinitely old. Like it doesn't strike me that these are the original Telosians that went underground. This is just the offspring of generations later. I don't think that we're supposed to believe these people are like thousands and thousands of years old. I think that they're just generations removed of their ancestors that first went underground. And they just realize it's now time for them to come back up to the surface, because they can come up to the surface now. And that's why it's so important that they find. It's funny because we never really know what other species they've captured. We don't see that.
Yeah, they definitely don't seem like, as you said, omniscient or
omnipotent.
Omnipotent. Like they're just kind of like, they're certainly fallible, because eventually Pike gets a hold of one of them and tries to choke him out. And
well, it's funny because they bring down two more women to see if he can get them to like explore them, and like, now we're giving you options now. Here's your chance. You can have sex with the computer lady, or you can have the hot redhead if you like gingers, or we got this other one who you already met. Like, so, and that's almost, they're messing with him a little bit, but it's funny he messes with them too, because they weren't smart enough to think about taking like the phasers away from them. Like, so he just uses that as a kind of a trick. He tricks them somewhat, and it's neat. Like, I think it's like they're not a truly evil race or something. They're just kind of desperate for what they're trying to accomplish, and they just think that, I don't think they realize what they're doing.
Yeah, they like, I think it was like breeding stock or something like that for their.
Right.
I don't remember exactly how they said they were going to like make this into continuing the race, but
somehow they basically said that they were going to need them to like help them basically work the land and be farmers, and like it wasn't necessarily a race of slaves, like Pike says. But it's funny because when they realize that it's not working, like the look on the one Telosian's face, the lead Telosian's like, we didn't expect this. Like you were our last hope, and like I guess we're just gonna die now. And then they kind of like they don't really put up a big fight. They don't try to use their mind control powers to get him to blow up the ship or anything. Like it's there's the weird wolf thing that she tries to trick him with.
Yeah. Notice how the wolf thing it wasn't any stronger. Like so,
right.
I think genuinely it's just illusions. They can't, which illusions can be dangerous. I think that's how they actually got like the two women to beam down, but not the rest of the party. I think they probably just tricked the operator into
only beam down the women, and they didn't think of that was a trick. But again, they were definitely able to control, and there were limits to what they're able to do. Yeah. It's neat. I think it's cool how they get like I guess to get down there, and it's weird because Kirk would have it's always Kirk or Picard. They would have had some way to like we're going to help you guys.
Mm-hmm. They just left.
They kind of we just have to leave, and but Pike does say like, is there any way we could help you? And then they're like, we just can't because again, you guys would eventually learn our powers, and you'll destroy your society. So we'd rather destroy our society than destroy yours as well. So but then there's something neat happens. So in your mind, Pike offers success. The women beam up to the ship. He's still there. He wants Vina to go, and then it turns out that that's not really what she looks like, that she was an adult when she crashed. She was dying. They didn't know how to fix her. She works, but she's horrific.
Yeah, some body horror stuff there.
It's really, really bad.
I think she says they healed me, but they didn't know where all the parts went or something like that.
So she's got the creature, whatever, the Hunchback of Notre Dame shoulder, and her face is all scarred up, and she's much older than we realize too. So she can't leave. Yeah. It's not like she'll die if she leaves, but like she can't go around. Like she's unwilling to, She'll
give up her she just go around like that basically.
Right.
Like when she can just. I think it's implied that like the illusions also like walk normally, and like I think she had a limp as well in her true form,
right?
Which I don't think was present when she wasn't like that. So like it's just a lower quality of life for her,
right?
Which she doesn't have in the illusion.
They let her. She's able to just live with the illusion body that she has. So
I would choose that, to be honest. Like if I was like Pike or like her, it's like, what's life,
So, but here's the question I want to get to. So like he says, well, you will give her back her beauty. She says, and more, and then we see her beautiful again. And then that's kind of it. We cut to the ship, and he beams up to the ship, and they're like, what happened to Vina? And he says, well, she decided to stay, and I understand, and I agree with her. Mm-hmm. And then they go to the bridge, and basically they leave orbit. Mm-hmm. In your mind, so Vina's just alone now? How do you interpret the ending for Vina?
I mean, I assume they probably either created the ending of the cage anyway. They probably just created something to keep her busy, or maybe they themselves were conversing with her. Like, obviously they're, very different from humans in a social capacity, but like there's, some amount of stimulation there. Alternatively, they can just straight up steal somebody's memories from a passing ship and just, project them.
So you watched it. How did you feel like that it was?
I mean,
how did you interpret it?
The only way that I could think about it is that they said that they'd crashed like 17 years or something, right? So she's been there for 17 years by herself. They had to have entertained her somehow.
Right.
So I would assume, I mean, my assumption is that they just went back to what they were doing.
Right.
Whatever it was that was keeping her entertained that whole time, whether it would be...
Here's the reason I bring this...
Well,
go ahead.
Whether it be that they projected somebody else for her and they just made her believe that everyone else was there, or that they sort of... Because the whole goal was to find someone for her.
Right.
So I wonder if maybe they... I mean, there's a million ways you can think about it, but I wonder if maybe they had done something where they just kind of like let her live like a free life until they found somebody and like needed her again. Right. I guess maybe, I don't really know. But I would assume they just went back to what they were doing.
So on the episode, obviously now it's whatever number of years later, from when this happened, which is a lot of years now. 13 years. But it's no, but it's more than that, because it's 13 years. It's 13 years since this happened. So now Kirk and Spock have brought Pike, and they say, we want him to stay, and Kirk says, Chris, do you want to stay? And he's like, yes. And so he says, Spock, take him to the transporter room, and when you come back, I'm going to talk about how logical you've become. He's like, I think I've been pretty fucking logical through this whole thing, man. Like, I outsmarted all you people this whole entire time. Like that the Vulcans say, like, that, well, the actors, they use the voice actress, and she talks to Kirk and says, like, the illusion of the court-martial we knew would delay you, because we felt that if you had enough time, you would figure out how to get control of the ship, and then we would have never gotten Captain Pike here. And ultimately, that was our goal. So that's what we did, and then you see Captain Pike on the planet as his younger self going up the ramp with Vina and into the thing, and the Telosian says to Captain Kirk, Captain Pike now has his illusion, and you have yours. And we hope that you like your way as much as we like ours. And that's kind of how the episode ends. And they have that dramatic music where Kirk feels happy that Pike is going to have a good life.
Better than he had previously.
So here's what happens in the cage. So in the cage, it's a little bit different. Before he beams up to the ship, he looks, when they make her young again, and she literally takes an illusion Captain Pike with her up and goes down the elevator with the illusion Captain Pike. And the Telosian says to Captain Pike, she now has her illusion and you have yours. We hope your way is as good as ours. So in other words, the illusion that they put into Vina's head, the way I interpret it is they trick Luna into thinking that she's actually with Captain Pike.
Possibly.
Or that they just create the illusion that she gets to live out her life with an illusionary Captain Pike, but she doesn't want Captain Pike to sacrifice his whole life for her. She loves him enough to let him go. So either she chooses to live with the illusion, or they trick her into thinking that the illusion. So he beams back up to the ship, and he goes up to the bridge, and then there's a couple little comedic things, and he makes a joke about to Piper about, hey, you remember I told you I wanted to go home. I got to go home for a couple minutes, and blah, ha, ha, ha. And the Enterprise goes off on its merry way, and then there's these cool shots of the Enterprise, like, and they have like a cool little Star Trek-y thing at the end, and then that's how the original pilot ends. But it's funny how they were able to use that other version of the footage, edit it up a little bit so that it's Captain Pike actually going back, and then instead of Telosian's talking to Pike, they were talking to Kirk. It's smart how they re-edit the existing footage without having to completely.
Well, and that's just, I mean, it's a good way of using that stuff. I love when filmmakers and stuff do that. They take old footage and they manipulate it to change it, like they did that in Star Wars 9 with Leia.
Yep.
Like they took old footage and they just CGI'd a different outfit on her, and it was a real conversation. Like it was really Carrie Fisher.
Right.
And I love when they do that, because obviously the original ending of The Cage wouldn't work for this.
Of course.
Which is like, they were like, okay, well, that's not, technically speaking, The Cage isn't, it's the same episode, but the idea is that the actual cage isn't like canon anymore.
Right.
It's
not.
now
No, you're
become
right.
this new thing.
You're right.
So
the cage can't be canon because it ends
because
they had
different.
to change an alternate ending, obviously, to make this work. But it's neat how they were able to use the story the way it was done and the things that they have to kind of recreate a different ending. And actually, to be honest, this ending works better.
Oh yeah.
Oh, much better. I mean,
yeah, it's definitely less dark.
Yeah.
Because like it's like it'd feel a little weird if like just kind of took some kind of a puppet of me and
right.
Well,
I mean, he can't do anything, but at least there because his mind. They make several points of saying that his mind is perfectly fine, so that he can. It's not like he's not going to know.
Oh,
that,
if I was controlling the puppet, then that's fine. If
right.
somebody else was controlling my puppet and I was off like still captaining a starship, I'd have problems with that.
Well, I think the other thing to think about too is now I'm still thinking about this is that maybe like they could have gotten away with like the cage is canon because
it's almost canon. Like the only thing that's not that isn't accurate is that very last bit. Everything else I think is fine.
Well,
this
I mean,
is the
but
only
even
bit that
still, I
work.
mean, couldn't they get away with the idea of just being like, well, yeah, after he left, they just gave her a projection and then that satisfied her until he got back there.
Right.
And then she had the real thing. So, like, you could say that, but using the exact same shot is now, like, it's the same thing.
Because otherwise they would have had to reuse footage and that would have looked bad. So I think they probably, when they were sitting there writing it, they were like,
yeah, this is the new canon now.
We have to change it in order for it to work with
sense.
what we have.
And I think it makes so much more sense. And again, I think what's great about it is that, and when, again, because I love Strange New Worlds an awful lot. And I even liked when they had Captain Pike on Discovery and Spock and Number One and some of the things that we saw. But I really adore Strange New Worlds, and I like the fact that there's so much lore for that show that they created out this tiny little bit of the cage, like this little bit amount of Number One and Spock's relationship with Pike immensely, and it just is such a big thing that like he depends on Pike for so many things, and you see him becoming the Spock that we'll meet, the Spock that we're going to see that's Captain Kirk's best friend, as opposed to Captain Pike, who's his mentor, who's his father figure that he doesn't really have because his father's always been mad that he went into Starfleet instead of going to the Vulcan.
So I have a question for you guys, which is, now that we've talked about all of this, is had they gone through with the cage as the original pilot, do you think the show would have done just as well if Pike was the lead character instead of Kirk? Because I have a feeling like had they gone through with the cage, Kirk would never have even existed.
I don't think they could have afforded to have Pike be the captain through the entire run. If he was as big as he was,
I ultimately think, and I thought about this a bunch of times before. It's a better show from the second pilot on than the first pilot. I don't think Star Trek is Star Trek if it's not William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy as this version of a Vulcan that we get. Right. Because if you think about it, what Spock really is he is a merging of two characters. He's a merging of the Spock that we see on in the cage with the mental abilities of Number One. Mm-hmm. Like, I think they merged it into one character. Mm-hmm. So I don't think we would have gotten all the cool Spock stuff that we got. And we certainly, and again, we wouldn't have gotten Leonard McCoy, and we wouldn't have gotten Scotty, and Uhura, and in so many ways, Star Trek, try 2, or, the second try, is such a better thing than the first one. Mm-hmm. And I think it really would have been very dependent on Jeffrey Hunter and maybe Spock blowing up as a character like he did. But ultimately, I don't think Star Trek exists. Yeah. At this level. It was a show that was on in the 60s that nobody watches anymore. It'll be lost in space. I just don't think it would be. It wouldn't have had. It's and it's also freaking Captain Kirk William Shatner. Like, I just don't know if Jeffrey Hunter is that same.
He doesn't have as much name recognition, that's for sure.
Rick, what do you think?
If this was the cast they went through, yeah, I think it was good in the context of the show, the rest of the show, but like, I think Pike's just too much of a stick in the mud. You know,
that's what I was thinking. Like I don't think that
it's just not as
fun.
The
character's not as fun as Kirk. Like, Kirk is like interesting. He's kind of like a player who actually just like he's a bit more free spirited. I feel like an entire show about Pike just being a very
Pike's a military
clean-cut
officer.
Military follow the rules guy just would not be nearly as good.
And I definitely agree with that. I think like part of why Kirk works is, I hate to say it. I read this once somewhere, and I don't remember where I read it, but like it was almost like he's a Kennedy, like in the '60s concept of like he wasn't like when you think about like what we wanted our politicians to be kind of like in the '60s was the Kennedys. We didn't want them to be these old guys. And like that's why Kirk is supposed to be the youngest captain in the history of Starfleet. He doesn't really follow by rules. He breaks the Prime Directive on a regular basis because he does what's right. And people kind of like that Kennedy-esque feeling like that we felt about John F. Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy is that they were these like guys that were going to do what was right over what the rules were. And I think that's kind of what we're supposed to see with Captain Kirk. Like, how many times does he say, we've got to do what's right, not necessarily what the rules are, and then hope that they understand why I broke the rules so much. I think that's such an important part of Star Trek. And I think it works better maybe, again, because they were able to rethink their own idea, and maybe that second version that came out was a better version, was a better idea.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, you immediately get this, like, this relationship between Kirk and Spock, like almost immediately, this back and forth, mutual respect kind of thing. And Pike just, obviously in Strange New Worlds he does, but Pike just doesn't have he doesn't seem to have a strong relationship with anybody other than the Doctor, really. Right. Like, and the Doctor,
and they're gonna canonize that different on the show, obviously, as you'll see. I love the cast and I love the crew and I love the captain's relationship with the crew on Strange New Worlds. But you're right, I definitely agree with it's very like there's a separation, and it's more analogous to me of Next Generation in the early seasons about how Picard is very distant from his crew. Like, he's not really in that first season, especially. Like, I don't sense that Picard's really close with anybody. Except maybe Beverly, only because like he was best friends with her husband that died because of him.
Yeah.
Like, and he's like, it's almost like he's not super.
But we get a surrogate for Kirk in that crew, which is Riker.
Yes.
Who is that character?
Right. Like, I think when the original development of Next Generation comes out, I think they kind of had this idea that Riker was going to really be the star of the show, that he was going to go on all the away missions and Picard would just be up on the ship like polishing his desk. Meanwhile, Riker's running around being the hero with the new Mr. Spock, which was Data. And that's why the first person that meets Data is not Picard, it's Riker in the holodeck. They create that first moment because we don't ever, and this was some things that they've talked about doing, and obviously they did in the JJ movie, but it's not accurate to, the Prime universe. How did Spock and Kirk meet? There is no official canon version of it, of how they first meet. Now there is in the expanded new television universe about how Kirk and Spock met. But
from Strange New Worlds. But before that, we didn't really have something. So they're writing the canon now. But for all these years from 1960 until 2023 or 20, whenever Strange New Worlds came out, we didn't have that canon of but we still don't know what is Kirk. I'm hoping that they're moving towards this idea that we might see Kirk and Spock's first real true adventure together when they go off and do something together. And I think it's going to be on Strange New Worlds, and it won't even be him as the captain. But I think it's going to be setting up why
when Kirk takes over the Enterprise, he immediately says, "I want that guy to be my first officer." I think they're setting it up that they'll build that relationship over whatever number of seasons they're going to do with Strange New Worlds. But it's interesting that it took all these years to get to that. We already have an established friendship. Like it's not like it's a new crew. Like when we meet the Enterprise for the new, the next, like when you think about Next Generation, Voyager, Deep Space Nine, Enterprise, Discovery, these crews are all coming together in the pilot. Where the original series, they were already together. Yeah, a couple characters come and go, but the main crew's already there. This isn't Kirk's already captain of the Enterprise when the show starts. Pike is already captain of the Enterprise even under this thing. So it's different, like where instead of it like the other shows are all like this is how it started. Like they're all new to the ship. Where that's not the case in the original Star Trek, that they're already on the ship together. They're already kind of friends.
Well, and they kind of wrote that into like the JJ verse too, which was like this is the first time, like this is a brand new ship. This is the first time everybody's coming together, and it just happens to be all the characters that everybody knows.
But it doesn't. But it's and for for a lot of Star Trek fans, a lot of people get mad at that. And I realize it's an alternative universe, but people get mad because the Enterprise shouldn't be new. The Enterprise should be like old. The Enterprise should not be new. Like the Enterprise, like again, I know it's an alternate universe, but this should be a different because Pike should have already been captain of the Enterprise like 13 years ago. Like the ages are kind of goofy. Like it's like that's why I think they gave him like in the thing they gave him like gray hair because it's supposed to be 13 years after what we see like there.
Yeah, Pike was a little too old in the JJ verse, I think. Like,
to be getting his first command of the Enterprise.
Yeah, like.
Well, he was already a captain. They just gave him that ship for the first time.
But literally, when you see like in the JJ movie, when Chris Pine rides up on his motorcycle and joins Starfleet, and he says, "I'm going to become a captain in 3 years," or whatever he says. Or you said 3 years, I'll do it in 2. The Enterprise is just getting built. The Enterprise is literally being built. Which, and again, I know it's an alternate universe. I don't want to go down that stupid thing, but like. In Star Trek canon, the Enterprise, and you know who's the captain of the Enterprise? There's a captain of the Enterprise before. Robert April is the captain of the Enterprise before Pike. We know of the captain that was because it's from the animated series. Admiral, what did I say? April? Yeah, I think it's Admiral Captain April and his wife. Are on an animated episode of the original of Star Trek, the animated series which was on back in the 70s, and they're the original captain. Him and his wife were on. He was the original captain of the Enterprise when it came out of space dock, even before Pike was captain. So Robert April is the actual original captain of the Enterprise, and it's canon. Like everything in animated series is canon as well. And again, we meet Robert April even in. They've changed his race because he's black, and April is on Strange New Worlds, but he's black. He's not a white guy like he is in the thing. So it's the Enterprise is not a new ship when Captain Kirk gets it.
I just have to assume that like in the Kelvin timeline, like that the Enterprise in the Kelvin timeline is a lot bigger than the Enterprise in the Prime universe. And like I assume that it just took longer to build. Like it's basically a battleship. Like
I would agree with that. I definitely think that the JJ verse is definitely a more militarized version of Starfleet. And clearly that's a bigger issue because in obviously the second movie when RoboCop is the guy who has that big-ass ship that's even bigger than the Enterprise. Yeah. That ship is just ridiculous. When they painted it black to make
the USS Vengeance.
Whatever it is, whatever the one
like
that's...
twice the size of a Galaxy class or something.
Like it's ridiculous. Like, and I mean, and everybody's got their pluses and minuses about those movies, but they're great. And I like those movies an awful lot. I'll watch them. I don't dislike them, but they're just not Star Trek enough for me. There's a lot of Star Trek in it, but it's missing a little bit of the soul.
It's
that
action.
You get.
It's action versus science.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Picard, to be honest. or Picard is kind of like it in a lot of ways.
Sure.
Like it's very, very much a narrative happening, and like we're not straying too far from it.
Well, I mean, if you watch all the shows, there's always that. Like we've talked about it, it's the moral play, and there is a bit of a moral play that's kind of in there with the JJ movies, but it's not really there. I mean, it's loosely disguised, and it's it's a lot of. It's some of the same reasons why people don't like the JJ versus Star Wars, for the same reasons, because they feel like it's surface level fandom. It's not the deep understanding, which is what I think most people wanted. Because originally, that was what they wanted. They had this. There was a different script in mind for how Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock meet. But then they decided they needed to make it something, and they decided to make this whole time travel concept. And I do agree with the time travel concept is that you needed to have this alternative universe, because otherwise everybody's going to get pissed. And they needed, and the best way to do it is have Leonard Nimoy be Mr. Spock in the movie. So I do agree with that. I think that works incredibly well, because it's an out. Yeah. It's an out to say, well, Leonard Nimoy's in the movie, and he says, like, yeah, this is just an alternative universe. Like, it's alternate versions of ourselves.
Literally just says, I went through a black hole and popped out, and here I was.
Yeah, and
it's
whatever
like, okay,
our lives,
well, I guess we believe
whatever
this.
our lives would have been is now been changed. This is now alternate. He says something like that he might as well looked at the camera and said, this is an alternate universe. Don't worry about, your red 2x4 railings. They still exist in an alternate timeline. And Star Trek's all about alternate timelines. There's like tons of episodes about alternate timelines.
Right.
So what do you think overall? Is this you can see why this you can see why this episode won an award.
Yeah, this is one of the better episodes of season 1, to be honest. Like you know what? Honestly, I'm going to say it's the best episode of season 1.
Really?
Yeah, like, maybe not the most iconic, but, like,
okay.
It's just the way that, like, they wove the narrative together and, like, wove it into the original narrative of the
It's up
pilot.
To this point, I think it's the best written.
Yes.
I definitely would agree with you. I think script-wise that they really punched my ticket in terms of writing.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? Obviously, you've watched a bunch of episodes, even some beyond this.
See, and
how are you on this one?
See, this episode is a very, very, very good example of lazy writing and good writing at the same time. Like, they were like, I don't want to lose this episode, so let's just use the cage footage and make a whole episode out of it. But also, I could only imagine they have to sit there and be like, but we can't just use it. We have to find a way to make it make sense. So then sitting there and coming up with this moral
there's definitely other episodes
behind it
based on your point, because there's definitely episodes down the road that are lazy, where they don't really explain why. Well, why would we be seeing footage like this? Because it feels like it's something that somebody shot with a camera and not just security cameras that are up on the ceiling. Or, somehow the computer is recording everything at all the time, like multiple security cameras. But I agree with that. I definitely rank it up there. And again, every time I rewatch one of these episodes for the standpoint of doing it for this show, like, I definitely have a different appreciation, except for Mary.
Yeah.
It moved up for me now, especially because of Strange New Worlds. And I apologize if I keep bringing that up, but
it's fine.
I just think it's smart the way they did it.
Well,
there's a couple episodes coming up. One of them is one of the next episodes that we have to cover. I think Corbomite Maneuver is one of my favorite Star Trek episodes.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I think this is an example of lazy writing that became good writing. I feel like they really were like, oh man, we really, really, really want to use this and don't want to lose it.
But they used it in such a good way.
That's what I'm saying. Is I feel like also it is one of those moments where,
as opposed to the typical clip show,
I feel like it's one of those moments where Gene Roddenberry was sitting there and he's like, they rejected my pilot. How can I make them have to watch it?
Yeah. That's an interesting point.
You know what I mean? They have to watch my new pilot, so they have to watch the original pilot, so I'm just going to force them by literally being like, hey, this is what happened.
I do remember a particularly egregious clip show from, I think it was like the end of either the beginning of season 3. No, it was close to the end of season 3 or 4 of TNG, where Picard is sick or something like that. No, Riker is sick. Riker gets infected with like some kind of a tentacle on a planet. He gets stung by it, and they just kind of reuse footage from like older episodes of Star Trek. That's lazy. That was awful. That was a terrible episode.
I think all clip shows are lazy. This is probably a clip show that's not lazy. There's like 3 or 4. My wife watches a lot of Friends, and there's 3 or 4 clip episodes of Friends that are just like just awful. They're just like so hard to watch. But I think that I do agree with your sentiment though that Roddenberry like woke up in the middle of the night like for months trying to figure out how am I going to get to use this footage because I think this footage is important and I think this will be important in my canon. It was expensive.
It was expensive to film that episode too. Like,
and my wife is telling me that she wants her number 1 character to still get some airtime. So I wonder if she gets. Well, yeah, well, you get residuals. Not that they were very much back then.
She's the computer.
She's the computer
forever.
So, all right. So when we come back next time, we have Corbinite Maneuver, which happens right before this, and maybe I'll have some Tranya for that episode.
Okay.
Have you ever had Tranya?
Nope.
We hope you like it as much as you relish it as much as I do. That's a line from the episode.
Oh, okay.
And then we also have, I think, Conscience of the King.
Yeah,
which I enjoyed that episode.
So Star Trek has always had this weird connection with Shakespeare.
Mm.
There's a lot of Shakespearean themes.
There's a lot of Renaissance style stuff in this show.
A lot, and there's clearly documented. There was even a college class somewhere that wrote that was about Star Trek, and how it really much is it's very much like Shakespearean plays. Mm-hmm. Even once in a while they have a funny one, which is what Shakespeare kind of theoretically didn't, even though probably he didn't write those, but who knows. But then also the concept of like if you think about episode Star Trek 6, when the Klingons come onto the Enterprise, and they say you haven't really experienced Shakespeare until you've read it in the original Klingon, which is so they have this premise that somehow the Klingon are quite aware because you got friggin' what's his name, quoting Shakespeare as he's trying to kill the Enterprise crew. But this episode they go full on. We're going full on. We're doing Shakespeare in the middle of the effing episode. We're gonna we're doing frickin' Macbeth while we're on the Enterprise, like pretty much, or whatever play they're doing.
Yeah, we're just gonna do a play.
and we get Commander Kevin Riley back for another. Captain Thomas O'Reilly, he's back in this episode. So we'll have those 2 next time.
Yep. So I guess we'll cut it there then. If you have any feedback on any of the episodes, like for example, when we cover the Corbinite Maneuver, and I've already forgotten what the title of the next episode is. Conscience of the King. Go ahead and send that feedback to doublefistpunchpodcast@yahoo.com. We still haven't gotten anything on that, but I'm looking at it. So.
Yeah, please share it if you're a Star Trek fan. Please share it with some of your others. There were a lot of us. Sometimes us Star Trek fans like to hide a little bit. We're trying to pretend we're big Star Trek fans, but hopefully you enjoy this. And
it's not the 90s anymore. You don't need to hide.
Right.
You won't be chucked into a volcano.
No. Maybe over a ledge like by rock. So he's still falling. That guy.
Yeah, he's gone. Oh.
Nope, we're gone.
Okay.
I think he faded out on us. Nope, we're
All
back.
Right, we're back. We're back.
All right.
Double fist punch.
Okay. Oh, we forgot to sing. Da, 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 da.